If you've been on any American road lately, you've seen it, you've felt it. The trucks, the SUVs, they just keep getting bigger and bigger. And let me tell you, it is not your imagination. The reason why has less to do with what we want to drive and a whole lot more to do with the very roads we're driving on. So what is going on? Why are American cars just so massive? You'd probably guess it's just about what people want, a cultural love for big things. But the real story, well, it's this wild mix of obscure engineering, sneaky federal loopholes, and even a tax law you've probably never heard of.
Believe it or not, the answer is hiding right here. It's in the connection between something as totally boring as the curve of a driveway and the gigantic frame of a modern SUV. This connection has been quietly reshaping our cars and our roads for decades.
Okay, so to crack this mystery, we've got to start small, and I mean really small. We're going to start right at the street corner, and we're going to look into the surprisingly complicated and regulated world of your average driveway.
So check this out. This is a detail sheet for driveway construction in Douglas County, Colorado. Yeah, it looks kind of boring, I know, but these documents, they exist in towns and cities all over the country, and they control every single detail of how a car gets from the street into a garage.
I mean, just look at the level of detail here. The width, the slope, the exact angle, absolutely nothing is left up to chance. It just goes to show you how meticulously our infrastructure is engineered. But it begs the question, right? What kind of vehicle is it all being engineered for?
So where do these rules even come from? Well, they aren't just pulled out of thin air. They're actually the result of super detailed scientific studies of how we as drivers really act behind the wheel. And a lot of this research happens on some pretty cool test tracks. And here we are. Welcome to the Texas A&M Proving Ground. Way back in the 80s, researchers built this incredible test track using, get this, flexible fire hoses to create different kinds of driveways and intersections. Then, they got a bunch of regular people to drive a 1977 Chevy Impala through them just to see what design felt the best. The main thing they were looking at was something called the curb return radius. It sounds super technical, I know, but it's really just the curve of the curb as you pull into a driveway. This one little measurement is the entire reason some turns feel smooth and easy and others feel super tight and just awkward. And here's the big takeaway from their study. A tight radius, it forces you to slow way, way down and swing really wide. A lot of the time, you end up creeping into the other lane. But a more generous, wider radius, that lets you make a faster, smoother, more controlled turn, all while staying perfectly in your own lane. This diagram from the study illustrates the problem perfectly. It shows the average path that drivers took when they had a small, tight radius. You can see they have to swing way out into the other lane just to make the turn. So the study concluded that to encourage what they called desirable entry paths, that radius should be at least 20 feet. And what was the actual difference in speed between the best driveway design and the worst? Just 4 miles per hour. That's it. It's a tiny difference, but it's a difference that encourages traffic to keep flowing instead of forcing people to make slow, careful maneuvers. Our roads are literally built for speed and flow. Okay, so let's recap. We figured out that our local roads, right down to the driveways, are engineered to favor these gentle, sweeping turns that you can take with a little bit of speed. So that leads to a pretty obvious question, right? What kind of vehicle is perfectly built for that kind of driving? You guessed it, the long, wide, and stable kind. All right, now let's zoom out. We're going to go from the local street corner all the way up to the national level. Because it turns out there are some really powerful incentives from the federal government that actually reward car companies for building bigger and bigger cars. It all starts with something called CAFE standards. They were created with a good goal in mind: make cars more fuel efficient. The rules basically say that a car company's entire fleet has to meet an average MPG target. But hidden inside this rule is a gigantic loophole. As a Reddit user named BattyWombat21 pointed out in a thread all about this, the system has this really weird quirk. A car's required fuel efficiency target is actually tied to its size, specifically its footprint, which is the area between its 4 wheels. And that one little detail changes everything. So here's how the game works. Instead of spending billions on crazy engineering to make a small car a tiny bit more efficient, a car maker can just make the car a little bit longer and a little bit wider. By increasing that footprint, the car gets bumped into a whole different class with a lower, much easier MPG target to hit.
It literally became cheaper to make cars bigger than it was to make them better. But wait, the footprint loophole is only half the story. There's another, even more direct reason to go big, and this one comes straight from the US tax code. As another Reddit user, Corner Zan, explains it, there's a piece of tax law that says if a vehicle weighs over 6,000 pounds, a business can write off the entire purchase price in the very first year. For anything under that weight, they have to spread out that deduction over many years.
So suddenly you've got this magic number, 6,000 pounds, 3 tons. The second a vehicle crosses that line, it becomes this massive tax advantage for any business owner, whether you own a construction company or a dental practice.
And no, this is not a coincidence. The Ford F-150 Lightning weighs in at just 6,015 pounds. The Tesla Model X was actually marketed as qualifying for this exact tax break. Automakers are literally engineering these vehicles to land just over that 6,000-pound sweet spot. It's wild.
Okay, so we've got roads designed for big cars and federal rules that make it profitable to build them. But what happens when those two things collide out on the actual street? Well, that's where all this policy and physics crashes right into human psychology.
It creates this dangerous feedback loop. Some people call it a safety arms race. As more and more of these giant trucks and SUVs are on the roads, if you're driving a smaller sedan or a compact, you start to feel really vulnerable. So what do? For your next car, you buy something bigger just to feel safer, which of course just makes the problem worse for everyone else. And the result of this arms race is just striking. The whole idea of a small truck has totally changed. Like one person on Reddit pointed out, today's Ford Ranger is about the same size as an F-150 from just a few decades ago. The truly small truck is basically extinct now, pushed into this middle ground that's bigger and way more expensive than it ever used to be.
So what we have is this incredibly complex, interconnected system where everything, the road design, the tax laws, the fuel regulations, it all pushes in the exact same direction, bigger. It's a cycle where the roads and the cars have basically evolved together, which leaves us with one last, really big question. If we are to decide we want smaller, more efficient vehicles, where do we even start to break that cycle? Do we try to change the car, or do we have to start by changing the rules?